Dear listeners, wherever you are, curl up with a cup of something warm. Tonight, you're stepping into history's hidden corners with me. Let the day slip away as we unfold a tale woven from starlight, memory, and a little bit of wonder. A brass astrolabe rests in Lyra's hands, its surface polished smooth by centuries of gazes and touch. In the quiet of the British Museum, her thumb drifts across a single engraved star, catching an almost imperceptible glow. The air holds still. Then, like a curtain parting, the world shifts. Candlelit pages flicker before her eyes, and beyond them the soft darkness of Tuscan hills. Florence emerges around her, a city alive with watchful patrons and whispered promises, where every discovery feels both luminous and dangerous. A comet that should not exist, one woman's secret that could cost lives. And it all begins with the touch of her thumb against that glowing brass. Lyra's thumb lingers over the engraved starlines of the astrolabe, an ancient star chart in brass, mapping the sky's dome in delicate arcs. She traces the rotating web of tiny markers, a pattern both scientific and strangely alive. The hush of the museum seems to press inward as if even the other artifacts are holding still. Then, with the faintest pulse beneath her touch, the metal trembles like a heartbeat. The floor shifts beneath her feet. Candlelight breathes across parchment. The scent of warmed wax mingles with the dryness of paper, sharp and immediate. Where polished glass once held relics locked behind cases, rolling Tuscan hills now swell skyward, their outlines fading into twilight. Star maps hover in her vision, hand-drawn and imperfect, capturing heavens still in the midst of being understood. The change comes quietly, like drifting into another room rather than a leap through time. As though the astrolabe has waited, patient, for her hand to complete its circuit. A thought brushes her mind. Objects remember. More than form, they echo the hands and hours that shaped them. This instrument carries centuries of eyes turned skyward, and now it reaches for hers. Its glowing lines seem to see her as much as she sees them, folding her into a story already in progress. The stone beneath her soles feels solid, cool and rough, no longer museum tile but a Florentine street. The evening air nips her cheeks, sharper and cleaner than London's damp. Around her rise narrow stone facades, voices carrying in soft Italian, the vast dome of the cathedral cutting bold against the dusk. She tilts her head back, and stars prick the sky, so many more, so clear, unmarred by modern smoke. The astrolabe remains warm in her hand now, humming with a quiet current that threads into her pulse. It feels aware, alive, tethered not only to the night above but to this city itself. She stands at the threshold of Florence in 1610, its weighty silence stretching out around her. The glow in her palm seems to quicken, as if sensing the hidden currents of a place where brilliance and suspicion walk close together. Florence folds around Lyra in soft shadow and whispered breath, its beauty threaded with restraint. The air carries wood smoke and fresh bread, but beneath it lingers something taut, an unspoken vigilance. Observatories rise along the rooftops, their narrow towers and telescopes angled skyward like questions nobody dares to ask aloud. In the narrow lanes and under stone arches, words fall low and careful, shaped less for wonder than for safety. Here discovery and doctrine move side by side, never far from collision. The Medici's patronage offers resources and prestige, yet always tethered to invisible expectations. A thought too bold, a theory too direct, threatens to stumble against the weight of belief. Lyra hears snippets of conversation in a crowded salon near the Ponte Vecchio. One man exclaiming over new lunar patterns, another dropping his voice as if fearing walls might listen. Their unease tells her more than their words, that joy in knowledge is shadowed by cost. The city itself feels like a listener, stone facades holding too much silence, the cathedral dome looming as both marvel and warning. Watchfulness pools in the corners, in the candle-lit halls where scholars lean close yet leave phrases unfinished. For Lyra, the contrast is sharp, beauty so striking it nearly glows, wrapped around caution that dulls its edges. It wasn't a random pull. Something here needed her touch. That clarity settles deep within her, fiercer than her first astonishment. She understands she has not landed in Florence by chance but been brought to its very center, where loyalty and fear divide the air. The astrolabe's glow does not simply illuminate the stars. It casts light on the hidden fires that burn behind locked doors and shuttered windows. The weight in her hand steadies her, firm and certain, urging patience, urging readiness. She breathes into that thought, aware she cannot yet see where to step, only that she must. And just as this recognition roots itself, she feels it. The quiet call of a nearby presence, candlelight flickering behind an open door, the trace of a figure bent in concentration. Something waits within, and she finds herself drawn toward it. The door was ajar, and soft candlelight pooled across the floor. Inside, a woman bent over a worn desk, her outline etched in gold against the glow. Fast strokes of a quill swept across parchment, filling margins with numbers and slender arcs of stars. This was Claudia. Her concentration drew the air taut, the room holding the same paradox as she did. Refuge and peril bound together. Some women did work at high levels in this era, though history often buried them. Claudia's charts revealed her skill in ways no dismissal could erase. The careful plotting of constellations, the mathematical order imposed upon chaos, the telescope she had altered with lenses she had shaped by hand. Each adjustment spoke of restless intelligence, of vision pushing against boundaries she was never meant to cross. When Lyra's step caught her ear, Claudia stiffened. Her eyes lifted briefly, sharp, with the practiced caution of someone who had learned that discovery could be as dangerous as silence. It wasn't hostility but distance, an instinct to guard what was fragile. Fragile not in its truth but in its safety. The papers seemed almost like a wall between them. Then the astrolabe shifted in Lyra's hand, its brass edge catching the candlelight. The fleck of radiance glanced across Claudia's gaze, and her posture changed, not suddenly relaxed, but carefully eased, as though she recognized an echo of her own language in Lyra's possession. The object was not just an instrument, it was a signal, a key. It told her that this stranger did not come empty-handed, but carried a method of seeing the sky that belonged to both of them. What passed between them then was cautious, but undeniable. Not trust in full bloom but the first soft edge of it, shaped by shared curiosity rather than chance. Claudia's expression shifted to measured inquiry, skeptical yet willing to risk a word. Her voice was low, precise, the tone of a scholar who knows the price of being overheard. And she spoke of what she carried alone, a comet. One that moved against reason, carving a path the models could not contain. Lyra leaned closer, registering the certainty in those quiet words. She realized Claudia was not describing a marvel alone, but the beginning of something that unsettled the very ground beneath them. Claudia lifted her hand to the chart, and traced the inked arc of a comet whose path refused to bend to expectation. Its course ran wild, cutting through the neat geometry of circles that scholars trusted, ignoring every rule that kept heaven in harmony with earth. To speak of such a movement aloud was dangerous, an idea that might upset powerful people, the kind of minds who found reassurance in fixity, not disruption. For centuries, comets arrived as symbols as much as stars, harbingers of plague, famine, or kings falling from thrones. Their sudden burn across the night looked like divine warning, a sentence fire written against the quiet sky. And here was Claudia's observation, a pattern not of omen, but of proof. Numbers, timings, coordinates that made the comet more than rumor. Her ink left evidence, and evidence left her exposed. The atmosphere in her small room thickened. What should have been the safe work of measuring light now felt like trespass against a fragile order. She whispered that men had already come to her door. They smiled, hands folded neatly, their questions measured. But it was not curiosity that guided them. They asked for her timelines, for dates precise to the minute, not to learn but to weigh. As if calculating what must be tolerated, what must be erased. The silence behind their words pressed heavier than the voices themselves. Claudia's charts were the only careful record of the comet, and that made them dangerous. Every angle she marked, every series of positions, clarified the night sky in a way that threatened to unmask the old models. That paper, ink and number could unseat circles once considered eternal, was unthinkable to those sworn to uphold them. And it meant her notes could not simply exist, unshielded on her desk. Women before her had hidden discoveries in codes, dressing equations as recipes, threading knowledge into letters that read like household chatter. She spoke of doing the same if she must, of concealing truth behind words that dull eyes would never read twice. Lyra felt the weight of urgency settle on her. If this fragile comet were to survive, if its path were to remain known, it would need shelter, some space where watchful eyes could not intrude. Her gaze fell to the astrolabe still warm in her palm, its brass edges pricking with quiet possibility, as though offering more than she yet understood. Lyra turned the astrolabe carefully, letting candlelight trace its edges. Beneath her fingers lay seams she hadn't noticed before. Delicate joins worked almost flush with the brass. With patient effort, one hinge yielded, and a hidden compartment gave way. Inside lay a nest of crystal lenses set in velvet, their surfaces catching the small flame with cool spectral light. What had seemed only a star map, a device that historically helped scholars read the sky, was something deeper, a layered instrument of wonder and secrecy. Claudia leaned close, as Lyra lifted the first lens. Positioned within the astrolabe, it brought the comet's details into sharp relief, magnifying specks of light into precise shapes, as if distance itself could be urged nearer. Yet magnification was only one of its rules. When the lenses were aligned together, they projected shifting constellations onto the walls. Star maps, both luminous and fragile. These projections obeyed clear laws of their own. First, the lenses required steady focus. A wavering hand or distracted mind fractured the image. Second, the sky they displayed followed the user's true intention. What Claudia sought, she could study, but falsehood dimmed the light. And third, any attempt to shape the projections toward deception left them unstable, the stars flickering as though refusing to comply. Still, the illusions had utility. They could pass casually as accurate charts to an untrained gaze, yet their subtle drift betrayed them under expert inspection. That balance made them useful, convincing enough to explore, private enough to vanish if challenged. Here was a tool not for boasting but for shelter, a sanctuary where inquiry could remain hidden from those eager to silence questions. Under the glow of those shifting constellations, Lyra sensed something more subtle beneath the strict rules. Now and then, when the light bent strangely along the brass frame, half patterns emerged on the edge of sight, suggestions of positions not yet fixed, hints of what might come if the heavens turned a certain way. Not predictions, not certainties, but possibilities glimpsed like reflections across moving water. That night, they steadied the instrument on Claudia's desk, and aligned its hidden glass. The comet's arc burned bright across the projected sky, undeniable and alive, set against circles it refused to honor. They exchanged a quiet look, both aware the work now belonged to no single hand alone. What lay ahead would require more than two people, more than a single study and a single secret. The air seemed to hold that invitation, waiting just beyond the lamplight. One evening, as lamplight edged along Claudia's desk, she drew out a small wooden box hidden behind heavy books. Inside was a neat stack of letters, each sealed with wax pressed by signets Lyra didn't know. Her voice dropped low as she spoke. She was not working in isolation. Across Europe, in Prague, in Paris, in London, other women bent their hours to the sky and to the patterns of the living world. Astronomers, botanists, natural philosophers. Each worked apart, yet together. Their circle relied on quiet channels, coded letters, and trusted messengers who carried folded words without asking what they meant. A recipe for ink might conceal the mathematics of a comet's arc. A sketch of a flower could mask a diagram of unseen planets. Sometimes, as Claudia explained, women wrapped their findings in the fabric of everyday notes, disguising knowledge in the language of household life. What looked unremarkable to some eyes could carry the weight of an entire discovery to another. The network was no guild, no institution. It was fragile, improvisational, a quiet current of ideas passed by hand and by hush. Their efforts were not meant to shine in public records, but to ensure that work survived despite walls built to keep them out. Each woman risked more than silence if found, yet each persisted, bound by the need to keep looking, measuring, preserving what might otherwise vanish. Lyra, listening, understood her place without needing long explanation. She would help encode the comet's path, so it could travel without being read. Her careful hand joined the quiet rebellion, ensuring that figures drawn in candlelight might outlast the doubt and suspicion around them. In this circle, the prize was not fame, not even recognition. It was the endurance of truth itself. A warmth settled in her chest as she worked alongside Claudia, translating starlight into lines more durable than voice. What she felt here was belonging, deeper than she had expected. Connection not only with one woman across a desk, but with many others scattered through distance and danger. Their shared labor filled the air with a closeness that pushed past caution, carrying her toward the night that waited outside. Night after night, we leaned close over the telescope, our whispers folding into the dark. At first the talk was careful, limited to figures and refractions, to how light bent, and how shadows marked the edge of a planet. Yet in that shared focus, something softened. The longer we argued over details, sometimes like lovers sparring over the smallest favors, the clearer it became that the numbers were only one part of what held us together. In time, the silence between calculations carried other things. Claudia told me the shape of her solitude, what it was to know too much in a world determined not to listen. I listened as her voice steadied itself against old wounds. And when I began, almost without realizing, to speak of my own time, just fragments, never the whole, I felt my guard loosen in a way I hadn't expected. I told her about the museum, how objects seemed to carry memory, and how moving through centuries had left me wondering if I would ever belong. Each word carried risk, but I gave them anyway. The telescope itself was our anchor. Looking outward gave us license to look inward. When she adjusted the eyepiece, her shoulder brushed mine, and I didn't pull back. It wasn't a spectacle. Our closeness was cerebral, deliberate, formed in equations whispered at 3 in the morning, in questions that slipped past books into something more fragile. I noticed her severity diminish as nights passed, her usual vigilance yielding to a quiet ease whenever I met her gaze. In her I found not only a mentor, not only a partner, but someone who felt like a matching spark, my equal in thought, my equal in wonder. And so I dared to risk myself further, to let silence be filled by vulnerability instead of retreat. The moment that sealed it came unexpectedly. After hours of watching the comet's stubborn arc, she didn't pull away from the instrument. She simply leaned her forehead against my shoulder, replacing calculation with quiet surrender. I placed my hand over hers. No words, no need. That gentle gesture stayed with me long after the stars began to fade. And it was still there, steady and warming, when the knock came at the door. Firm, measured and too certain to ignore. The sound carried through the study. Measured, deliberate, leaving no doubt about its intent. Claudia's glance was enough. Both of us understood who had come. She crossed toward the door while I steadied the weight of the astrolabe, my fingers finding the familiar hinges. 2 men stood framed in the threshold. Their robes were dark and finely cut, one marked by a cross worn high across his chest, the other keeping his gloved hand close to a pouch heavy with folded papers. Their smiles were polished, their tone unfailingly courteous, but their presence carried the edge of oversight. This was not a neighbor's visit, it was an appraisal. They asked to examine Claudia's work, their phrasing dressed in scholarly courtesy, but leaving no space for refusal. In that quiet space, every answer mattered. I adjusted the astrolabe's lenses, knowing its rules. Projection only held if used to show exactly what I intended others to see. Focus and purpose kept the light steady. Wavering would break the illusion. I called forth a safe sky. Circles, stars and paths long declared canonical. The wall filled with constellations so precise they seemed traced by compass. A version meant to reassure and pacify. Claudia matched the illusion with careful grace. She presented her ordinary charts, spoke of routine sightings, leaned into humility with a scholar's poise. Nothing sharp, nothing that could suggest defiance. Together we performed the script of harmless diligence, each word checked, each gesture arranged. The men moved closer to the projection, their eyes alert, even as their mouths shaped polite questions. The air was rigid with unspoken threat, like a chessboard where every move pressed against risk. For a long stretch the candle hissed, the wall glowed, and the questions circled. When at last they straightened, nodding, their assurance came in pleasantries, compliments delivered with shallow warmth. They left as politely as they had entered. The door closed softly, but the silence that followed seemed vast. We stood still, neither daring a word until the projected lines flickered out, and the wall dimmed once more. Only then did we share a glance, a faint lift of breath, that belonged to victory, however fragile. One night, one test survived. Later, when the locks were drawn and quietly returned, I found my hands straying again to the astrolabe. Its weight promised more than survival. It hinted at knowledge waiting just beyond safety's edge. One evening, with the study quiet and the bolts secure, I let the astrolabe shift once more in my hands. This time the lenses turned differently, their light bending not toward the steady heavens above, but toward something more fluid, less certain. The wall bloomed with patterns that refused to stay fixed. Not prophecy, but suggestion. Threads of paths not yet taken, pulsing with a flicker that felt almost alive. It was not a gift so much as a mirror of possibility. The images breathed like half-open pages, each one carrying both promise and cost. Claudia watched as one scenario steadied itself, her encoded charts slipping through trusted hands in Prague or Paris, the slow spread of truth carried by her hidden network. Yet the same vision frayed into darker strands. Letters caught, couriers questioned, silence seeping into the cracks. Each glimpse came with its own ledger of courage and consequence. The joy of knowledge passed on, the fear of knowledge extinguished, the weight of carrying both at once. For me the images bent differently. I saw echoes of my own world. The still halls of the British Museum, London air pressing grey and damp against the windows. One possibility showed me returning there, the astrolabe dark and inert, my hands empty once more. A loneliness pressed close at that thought, loss not of the object alone, but of this fragile circle in which I finally felt less alone. What the astrolabe revealed was less about events, more about what they carried. It showed us that to weigh a step was to also weigh its cost. That clarity was gentler than certainty, but heavier than ignorance. And in its shifting light we found another truth. The device did not simply map stars or futures, but the fragile ground between us, our willingness to speak openly, to bear doubt as much as discovery. Its glow wavered if fear edged too near our words. It steadied only when our intentions aligned. We both watched in silence until Claudia reached across and laid her hand over mine. The projections dimmed at once, leaving nothing but candlelight between us. We agreed then, without needing speech, that to guard the present was enough. The future, with all its branches, could wait for another night. And with that choice, our attention turned back to the work still waiting at the desk. The danger outside their door was gone, but within the study the real task remained. The comet's path, every number, every angle, every fragile note of its defiance, had to be secured for those who might one day lift it from obscurity. They worked with care, not for their own names, but for the dreamers who might follow the trail long after they were gone. Claudia shaped the data into disguises, her hand steady even in the dim candlelight. The trajectory of the comet slipped into the form of a recipe, its timings hidden among the instructions. Just as women had long encoded science inside domestic notes, entries no censor would question. A letter about planting schedules carried the rhythm of the comet's return to sight. Each phrase looked ordinary, yet every mark spoke of the sky. This was preservation as resistance. Across history, others had hidden their work in private collections or coded manuscripts, building quiet archives to keep knowledge alive in places where it was meant to be silenced. Claudia now joined that same lineage, her pen turning fragile discovery into something harder to erase. The act itself was defiance, not in speech or confrontation but in the stubborn continuity of recording truth. The astrolabe sat on the desk beside us, its glow softening as the hours passed. Its hum grew faint, and I sensed its limit, like a lantern guttering after burning too long. For all its brilliance, this instrument needed rest. Tonight its work was nearly over. It had guided, shielded, and carried us to this moment, but even such a vessel must go quiet. When the final page was sealed, Claudia pressed the wax firmly, the emblem catching the light before it dulled. A trusted rider would carry it on, the kind of bearer who accepted folded pages without asking their worth. That gesture, one seal, one nod, was all the promise required. Their triumph had no audience, yet the silence between them thrummed with certainty. What might have been lost was now hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered in a safer time. Outside, the night held still, as if leaning toward the choice they had made. And in that stillness, the edges of Florence began to waver, the familiar streets shifting softly with the dark. The night held its breath above them, the stars steady and bright, as if waiting for their last moment together. Lyra and Claudia both understood the thinning thread binding them across time. What came next was not a surprise, but an inevitability. Their farewell carried no grand speeches, no impossible vows. It was quiet, formed of what had already been shared. The long hours of work bent over charts, the shimmer of trust earned in secrecy, the kind of bond that grows slowly until it cannot be hidden. They did not try to name what could not be promised. Instead, they stood close, letting silence hold words that might have faltered. Claudia slipped a folded slip of parchment into Lyra's palm. Her fingers lingered just long enough to steady the weight of it. "When you're awake and alone," she said softly, "trace this and know what we kept." Unfolded later, it would show a pattern of stars, lines drawn not to honor a hero of myth, but to preserve the truth they had safeguarded side by side. It was a map that belonged to them alone, a sign that remembrance could endure where presence could not. The astrolabe warmed against Lyra's other hand, a tender pulse moving into her arm. Its hum deepened, not commanding but guiding, calling the moment to close. Light bent across the room with a soft shimmer, drawing edges into blur. The Tuscan air, the rooftops beyond, the scent of night flowers, all fell away into brightness. The parting came not as rupture, but as release, like a sigh leaving the chest after a long-held breath, and then, the shift is complete. Lyra was back in the museum, the night still and quiet as if nothing had disturbed it. The familiar air wrapped around her, cool and grounded. The astrolabe lay inert in her palm once more, only brass, silent and heavy. Yet in her other hand, the parchment remained, its fragile lines anchoring her to the intimacy she had carried across centuries. The ending was not closure, but continuation. Not absence, but memory held close. That sketch of stars was proof of what had been, and what would remain, an unseen constellation stitched across distance, waiting quietly in her pocket. The silence of the museum held steady around me, the kind that pulls after light has shifted. The astrolabe in my hand was only brass once more, cold against my skin. The warmth was gone, its hum stilled, leaving behind only the steady shadows cast by the faint exhibition lights. I stayed still, letting the quiet seep into me. A moment passed before I felt it, the slip of folded parchment in my pocket. My fingers closed around it, edges worn faintly soft. That small weight pulled me into certainty. Whatever magic had carried me through was not imagination. It was resting now in the pocket of my coat. Duty remained. I logged the astrolabe's inventory number, but my hand trembled with other numbers in my head. The comet's arc, the whispered timings Claudia had traced. The ink seemed heavier on the page. This was no longer a task of cataloguing objects under glass. Each mark of my pen felt like bearing witness to something I had lived. Later, back in my own room, I unfolded the parchment slowly. The lines were delicate, a constellation inked with a precision that belonged only to her. They were not mythic figures, not legends from textbooks. They were the shape of what we had guarded, drawn for safety, drawn for remembrance. I let my finger drift along the paths, tracing and retracing each angle until the motion steadied my breath. It became a ritual, simple and grounding. A way back into those nights of candlelight and quiet calculation. In tracing, I heard again Claudia's voice low against the dark, her certainty beside mine. Touch carried memory more keenly than thought. Each stroke lit the echo of connection, as if time itself could soften under my hand. I had returned to safety, but not unchanged. Portions of me still lived in that chamber under Florentine skies, in the closeness of work shared over fragile hours. Yet here too, I carried it forward. The constellation was my anchor, not to fix me in the past, but to open the present a little wider. I traced the lines once more and felt the night settle, the world slightly larger for what had not been lost. Some truths live quietly, folded not only into books but into gestures, whispers, and maps of stars drawn by hand. Let this story rest gently with you. The courage of hidden work, the trust shaped across distance, the quiet constancy of wonder shared beneath the night sky. Good evening, and may your thoughts soften tonight among the Florentine rooftops where minds once met in secret light. Let this small constellation be your last thought before sleep. If this quiet night of stars felt like comfort, you might subscribe for more gentle journeys.